everybody. This is Ahmed Yunus's class. We will be doing a show for you today. Thank you for coming to watch. Bye.
My first interaction with Nelson Mandela was 1993 upon his second journey to Los Angeles, just prior to becoming president of South Africa in 1994. At the time, I was a sophomore in high school, having just come back to LA from living in Egypt and Saudi Arabia. And you can imagine, it was a crazy time in my life. I was an intern at the Muslim Public Affairs Council. I was an intern at the Minaret magazine. I was an intern at the mosque reproducing tapes in the attic. I was playing on a football team. I was playing on a basketball team. And I was all up in it as a kid. And in many ways, that was my parents. There was never downtime. Downtime was not permitted. Okay, so it's 93. I get dropped off at this event, and I'm sitting with a bunch of cool-looking kids. And it's essentially an interfaith youth leadership meeting with Nelson Mandela and his best friend Ahmed Kathrada, who was in prison with him. So Nelson Mandela altogether was in prison 27 years, most of them in Robben Island. So all of a sudden, Nelson Mandela walks in. And the first thing he does when he sits down is he asks that everyone refer to him as Madiba. Then they tell the story of being on Robben Island, the apartheid-era prison for political prisoners. And you can imagine being in a room of 15 to 20 people, all at the age of, 17, 18, 16, 19, sitting on the floor, listening to Madiba tell a story about his life. It's absolutely mind-blowing for a 17-year-old. He essentially, what I remember of the event are two very specific things. One was a story that he and Ahmed told about their time in prison. And the other was an explanation of a concept that's really important to Mandela. On Robben Island, visiting days were divided by community, religion, identity. So let's say, for instance, on Tuesday, all Christian charities, support services, organizations, families were allowed to deliver food, were allowed to make some sort of a visit, and there would be permission for the entrance of goods for the prisoners. On Thursday, all Muslim charities, support services, family visits, etc., would get the same opportunity that their Christian brethren got on Tuesday. So Madiba and Ahmed tell the story of how they convinced the other prisoners, every single prisoner, to claim Christianity on Tuesdays so that they can get food and medical support and services, and claim Islam on Thursdays so they could benefit from the same services, the same food, and the same support. And in this way, they were doing two things. They were showing their solidarity to the prison guards. They were showing that they would not be divided among each other, regardless of the moment of difficulty that they lived. And they were showing that there was indeed a common humanity between all, that some things rise above ideology, some things rise above the value or the utility of ideas, like our humanity. And in this way, this legendary figure is essentially telling you at such a young age, make the best of the horrible situations that you're dealt in life. Often we share these grand figures with each other. We share them on television. We share them in our hopes. We share them in our dreams. We share them in the lived stories that our parents have told us. And often when you get the blessing of interacting with one of these great figures, you realize that, they're kind of oscillating between superhumanness and overwhelming normalcy. How does one do that? How can you be superhuman in, for instance, your courage, while maintaining the humility and humanness requisite to lead? How can you be superhuman and human at the same time? Well, there's a book for that. It's called Mandela's Way, Lessons for an Uncertain Age by Richard Stengel. I say we dig in. Pura vida, beloved, let's get it. You're tuned to the wavelength of your own beauty. I'm your host.
Thank you for watching my dad's show. He's actually the one who presented me to do all of this. Thank you so much for watching a third time. And really thank you for watching our show. My dad was the one who picked this for me. And my name is Layla Eunice. Bye!
Although it seems heaven sent, we ain't ready to have a black president. Yes, we can. Change the world. Can you imagine when Tupac wrote those words? Can you imagine when Nas sampled that? Can you imagine when Barack Obama became president of the United States? I remember the day after Barack Obama became president of the United States. Washington, D.C. fundamentally changed. It was a different city. I left my apartment, and it was as if everything had changed. Every single person of color on the streets was walking with like this new found sense of I can. I can. I can change the world. In the Gospel of Hip Hop First Instrument presented by KRS-One, we read the following passage on page 47 for those who are following along. Within our hip-hop community, a person gains money, power, and respect through a display of high skill in one or more of hip-hop's unique artistic elements. Here you are truly judged by the content of your character, your attributes, your principles, your abilities, your reputation, who you associate with. Not by your race, or ethnic origin, or financial status. Real hip-hop is beyond all of that. Hip-hop is the promised land. I'm continuing to read. When we look closely at the king's dream, we see too many so-called coincidences and symbols that directly relate to hip-hop and its real development in the world. Like Barack Obama becoming the 44th president of the United States, approximately 40 years from the assassination of our king, where he predicted that, quote, "We as a people will get to the promised land," unquote. This we cannot ignore, especially when organizations like the NAACP started approximately 100 years ago. This was written in 2009, after a race riot in Illinois. We refuse to passively accept. Let me read that correctly. We refuse to passively accept the dream of our king as just a dream. We can see ourselves within the king's dream in real life. We can clearly see the king prophetically outlining the mystical path of hip-hop. Freedom. In his dream, years before we began to actually travel such a path. That's absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So let's dig in. The book is called Mandela's Way, Lessons for an Uncertain Age, and it's written by Richard Stengel, and it has a preface by Nelson Mandela himself. And let me read the preface. The preface of this book is the concept that I had referred to in the introduction of this week's episode, which is Mandela's core principle, his core guiding light for his engagement in the world. So now I am reading from Nelson Mandela, November 2008. In Africa, so I'm reading the words of Nelson Mandela, forgive me. In Africa, there is a concept known as Ubuntu, the profound sense that we are human only through the humanity of others, that if we are to accomplish anything in this world, it will in equal measure be due to the work and achievements of others. Richard Stengel, the author of this book, is one of those people who readily grasps this idea. Okay, Stengel writes that Nelson Mandela is in fact a complex man. Quote, anyone who has spent much time with Nelson Mandela knows that it is only a great privilege, but a great pleasure. His presence is golden, luminous. You feel a little taller, a little finer. Most of the time he is upbeat, confident, generous, fun. Even when the weight of the world was on his shoulders, he would wear it lightly. When you are with him, you feel you are living history as it is being made. He let me inside much of his life, some of his thoughts, and a little bit of his heart. Okay, what I would like to do is just try to capture a few of the core lessons that I was able to gather from this book. So let me begin with a story about courage, and this story is a telling by Richard Stengel of an experience that Nelson Mandela had when he was a child. I should probably say that the reason it's a little bit dark in here is because it's 5 a.m. and the kids are sleeping. Big up parenting. In January 1934, when he was 16, he, Nelson Mandela, and 25 other boys of the same age were secluded in 2 grass huts on the bank of the Mbashi River. These were the elite boys of the village. Their bodies had been shaved clean. They were coated in white ochre and wore only blankets over their shoulders. They looked like ghosts. Anxious and tense, they were getting ready for the Xhosa ritual of circumcision, what Mandela called, quote, the essential step necessary in the life of every Xhosa male. This is not a private ritual, but a public one, and the king, a number of chiefs, and a crowd of friends and relatives were sitting by the side of the river. It was not only a rite of passage, but a public test of courage. Each boy in turn was circumcised by an ingaibi. You know, in the Muslim tradition, they say if you misspell a word while you're reading the Quran, you get twice as many benefits. So let's hope that's true for this book too. Here is Mandela's account of what happened from his unpublished diary. Okay, I am now going to read the words of Nelson Mandela. Suddenly there was excitement, and a thin elderly man shot past towards my left and squatted in front of the first boy. A few seconds thereafter, I heard this boy say, "I am a man." Then Justice repeated the word. Justice is the king's son and Mandela's best friend. Repeated the word, followed one after the other by the 3 boys between us. The old man was moving fast, and before I knew what was happening, he was right in front of me. He looked me straight into his eyes. He was deadly pale, and though the day was cold, his face was shining with perspiration. Without saying a word, he seized and pulled the foreskin and brought down the assegai. It was a perfect cut, clean and round like a ring. Within a week the wound healed, but without anesthetic. The actual incision was if molten lead was flowing through my veins. For seconds I forgot about the refrain and tried instead to absorb the shock of the assegai by digging my hand and shoulders into a grass wall. I recovered and just managed to repeat the formula, "I am a man." The other boys seemed much stronger and repeated the chorus promptly and clearly when each one's turn came around.
حضرات السادة الركاب، أهنئكم بسلام.